All right. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Gen Z Decoded, how modern brands design, package, and communicate for growth. We are Naturally NorCal. We're part of the Naturally Network, which is a national organization made up of 11 chapters around the country with over 6,000 members and a reach of nearly 50,000 people, representing 25,000 companies. Our mission is to harness, accelerate, and elevate the power and impact of conscious business practices in the natural and organics product ecosystem. Before we get started today, we want to say a special thank you to those who support our local chapter. Thank you to Naturally NorCal's Founder Circle. These companies have made a multi-year commitment to help us establish our new chapter that launched earlier this year and support the expansion throughout Northern California in the coming years. Also, a big thank you to our annual corporate members and partners. All these supporters make our education programming and networking events possible. Thank you. And now I am going to hand it off to Mario DeFalco, founder of Illuminate Growth Partners. Mario, take it from here.
Thanks, Monique. Happy holidays, everybody. I'm Mario DeFalco with Illuminate. I advise and serve as a fractional CMO and Chief Innovation Officer for a range of clients, early stage and mid-size food and bev and some food tech brands. I'm helping clients build stronger brands, innovation pipelines, growth strategies. And today's topic's really one that's shaping a lot of the work that we're doing. And today, what we're talking about is we're focusing on that generation that's reshaping how we earn it, how our brands earn attention and loyalty. They have strong values, they move fast, and they expect brands to show up in ways that feel authentic, useful, and visually clear. So we have a great session. You'll meet who's going to walk us through this journey, but you're going to hear from three perspectives that take us on this path and how to understand Gen Z a little better and communicate more effectively with them. So today we have Colleen McGinnis, who's the Senior Director of Fresh Emerging Acquisition and Partnerships at NIQ. Then Paul Kagiwara, Creative Director at Trinity Brand Group. And then lastly, Sanders, who's the Founder and Chief Creative Officer at Nuex Creative. They'll each introduce themselves, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. As Monique mentioned, I'll be collecting all those questions that come in, so please throw them in, and we'll take it from there. So to get us started, I want to hand it to Colleen from NIQ. Give us some foundational views of Gen Z, who they are, how they shop, and what's shaping their decisions. Colleen?
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. Can you confirm you can see my screen? Because I can't see you again.
Yep.
Excellent. I'm excited to talk with you all today. My name is Colleen McGinnis. Again, I'm on the emerging brands team at NIQ.
Hey, Colleen, your sound's sounding a little muffled. I don't know if you moved position. If you could maybe get a little closer to your microphone.
Yeah. Thank you for calling that out. Is that any better?
That's better.
Okay. So if you're not familiar with Nielsen IQ, we're a global consumer intelligence company that's measuring everything CPG, providing that full view. So we're able to measure what's happening at retail and online. We're understanding why it's happening, and then we're helping you understand what to do about it. But today's conversation is all about Gen Z. And they're a really interesting generation and an important one for us to understand over the next 15 years because they are going to become the second greatest spending generation, followed by millennials. And they're also the fastest growing demographic in terms of number of buyers as they come into the store. And when you consider what their age is today, there's still a huge number of Gen Z consumers that aren't actually shopping just yet. And so they're going to be coming into the buying market, and we need to keep monitoring them and their shopping habits to make sure that we can adjust and continue to accurately target them. So who is Gen Z? They're kind of straddling a couple of different life stages. They can be in elementary school at that 13-year-old age. They can be starting college, maybe getting their first professional job. They could be buying a home or starting a family. But what we do know about generations is that their life stage and their communal values often come through in influencing how they purchase consumer product goods. Because many Gen Z consumers they could be still living with their parents, we wanted to do a quick analysis and understanding how households that have a Gen Zer versus don't have a Gen Zer, what their purchase habits look like. And so when we did that comparison, because again, in those households, the parent may be doing a lot of the purchasing, we found that categories like value packs or combo packs, variety packs, things of that nature really indexed high in the food category. And then on the more healthcare beauty side of things, again, 2-in-1 or combination packs were really over indexing in those areas. But we also saw a lot of play in the facial, nail, and hair care categories. Again, is that something that's becoming increasingly important to the Gen Z consumer? And so the point of kind of calling out some of these categories is no matter where they are, these Gen Zers are having an influence on many different purchasers. They're influencing their parents, but they're also influencing their friends, specifically because of how social media and technology driven they are today. They're often sharing their opinions on social media, and they care about what their friends think as well. And it's influencing, again, way more than just themselves and their household purchases. So this slide here is a nice kind of cross-generational look, and it helps us identify some of those life stages or different formative events that are influencing how they shop today. And so age is definitely a factor, like I said, but the Gen Z consumer is entering the market at a really unique time. They are coming in when social media, technology, and online shopping has really influenced the retail landscape. Gen Z consumers are digital natives. They've had this technology from the start, and they're often connected to multiple devices at any time. I just talked about how they're sharing things on social media and sharing their opinions. They're doing this all day, every day. Millennials, they are also technology driven, but we know that they didn't start with technology to the extent that it is today. They use social media and tech in a few different ways, maybe for getting their news, for checking out new trends, some product discovery, or catching up with friends. Gen X on the tech front, they've adopted it, but that's because they've had to. So Gen X could possibly be a household that has empty nesters or has high schoolers. So depending on where they're at on that scale, they are using technology in a selective way and when they need it. When we talk about boomers, they are the last to using technology. They're very value and loyal because right now they have the financial stability to purchase things at a premium. So when they find something that they like, they're pretty consistent in their purchases. Again, they have that financial stability to do that. So each of these generations have different traits or some of these life events that are influencing how they're purchasing consumer product goods. And we really need to understand each of those formative events to kind of unlock their growth. So when it comes to their shopping habits, we took a look at some of that channel distribution to figure out where they're shopping. And younger generations, both Gen Z and millennial, have a higher share of online sales, have the highest share of online sales. And again, Gen Z's total spend right now isn't as notable because, again, they're not all in the buying market right now. But it is something to call out that their growth is contributing to 1/3 of the total store growth. So again, while Gen Z represents a smaller set of consumers, they are growing and more will be entering the market that is going to influence the overall shopping habits for generations to come. We also see that Gen Z is leaning more towards mass merch and then grocery as well. You can see that in the pink and orange or yellow boxes here on our slide. And then some of our older generations, again, just doing that quick comparison, they lean more towards our drug and grocery channels, which is our traditional retail model, which again isn't as surprising. So we know that Gen Z is deeply invested in the beauty and personal care industry, and we took another quick look understanding where they're over-indexing by channel. And it's a little bit different. Mass is still hitting is really important, but they're also shopping in channels and retailers like Ulta and Sephora, as well as TikTok Shop. And so TikTok Shop is something that's really interesting. TikTok and Instagram have been becoming a social commerce platform, and it's really been developing and accelerating pretty quickly. We know that Gen Z is on those platforms all day, every day. And while beauty and personal care is pretty well established on TikTok Shop, something that may be surprising is that food is actually growing in this area as well. TikTok Shop, 81% of their sales is represented from the beauty and personal care departments, but food is still in the top there because TikTok Shop actually is represented as the number 30th largest food retailer for food categories. So again, something that Gen Z is leading the charge on is doing more of that social shopping and that social commerce. We know that generations are shopping differently across the store. So this was our take at kind of looking at a couple of different categories and areas in the store and seeing where are these generations buying these categories most. So this is maybe a little bit busy of a chart. So let me orient you with it a little bit. The categories on the bottom, there's three groupings. We took our ingredient type categories, so our more base meat, fruit, vegetables, things of that nature. We took some salty snacks and indulgent categories in the purple there, and then more of our prepared meals on the right-hand side. And each of those bubbles is going to represent in the middle a different generation. And then depending on where it's placed on the chart is how much they're spending compared to our total panel. And what we can see is Gen Z is under indexing for many of these categories. On the left-hand side, you can see those ingredient type categories like meat and fruit are under indexed. And now that may be because their parents are buying the ingredients and preparing the meals for the household. But for those that have their own household, it's possible because those ingredients require some sort of transformation, maybe something into a larger recipe, and require more time and effort. And something we also know about Gen Z is that they are looking for quick, convenient options. And that comes to life if you go onto the far right hand side, where they're in the middle range there in terms of meal combos for that category there. So again, as you look across generations, you see different things pop. You know, salty snacks is also under indexing, but we're seeing strong development in the spices and herbs. And one reason that may be is for those Gen Zers that are establishing their own household, it's possible they're buying those for the first time, and many of those other generations already have them in the house. So it's just interesting to see, based on different categories, how much they're spending by generation and where we can make some of these inferences on how they're engaging with these categories. This is one of my favorite slides because it's showing already how Gen Z is already more socially responsible and concerned about their health than any other generation that we have here. And so we do have all of the various generations kind of allocated out here, and we've identified various attributes on products that over-index by generation. Now you might say, why is Gen X blank? I did get that question, and it's interesting because when we ran this analysis, there wasn't any particular set of attributes or features that over-indexed for this generation. But again, you can see across all of the other remaining generations and Gen Z specific that they are very focused on their health and social responsibility as well. So lastly, I'll talk through how to connect with these Gen Z consumers. So it might seem difficult at first, but there is ways to win their wallet. And so we found these 5 key areas that you should be focusing on: social media, technology, value alignment, store experience, and convenience. We know that Gen Z is relying on social media and technology to stay connected, but we also know that in that top left-hand stat there, that they're 95% more likely to purchase a product that's been recommended by a friend on social media. And so those are some key areas where you can engage to capture their attention and hopefully win their wallet. We also talked about convenience in some of those meal preparations, but that also plays into the value alignment. So making sure that you're identifying and calling out the various attributes and benefits of your product, whether it's sustainable or clean label or what have you. It's really important for those to be identifiable to our Gen Z consumers because they're 37% more likely to buy brands that support social causes. So again, Gen Z may be young, but they're really shaping how households are shopping today and how brands can connect with these consumers. So if we can understand and start understanding what matters to them, their specific values, things again like their values, the value alignment, convenience, and technology, we can definitely grow with them and capture their purchase at retail. So thank you. I will pass it off to our next presenter.
Thanks so much, Colleen.
Yeah.
I love those charts. I would definitely dig in more, but they're always got a lot of rich information there. So thank you for that. And first off, poor Gen X, like just a blank screen there. I feel bad for them.
I know
Or
it's
sorry.
tough.
But I'll also be contacting you after because I need help how to connect with my Gen Z son. So I'm looking forward to you
Sounds
telling me a
good.
little bit more. All right. So next up, Paul is going to take us through, how to bring this to life from a creative standpoint. So Paul, why don't you take it?
All right, thank you so much. Um, so here from Trinity Brand Group. We've been around for about 20 years, and even though we see consumer demographics that they keep changing, those basic design and marketing principles remain the same no matter who you're targeting. And a lot of that comes down to knowing your audience and speaking their language and meeting them where they are. So I think Colleen did a great job really giving the foundation for us to start talking about that a little bit more. I also did a slide around kind of generational profiles. I think most of us on here are probably Gen X or millennials. So I thought it might be good to kind of ground us in some of the different areas and how there's some slight differences. Obviously, as we're creating communication, the aesthetic is a big part of it. And one of the things that's really interesting about Gen Z is their love of maximalism and their ability to kind of take in a lot of information. To a lot of us, it just seems like overload, but they are totally happy to go, anything goes, mixing up the colors, and just letting a lot of different things speak to you, as long as you're stopping them with a singular image. When we think about the social space, I think they're probably the first generation where online is their primary social space. And a lot of that is around creating those safe environments. They are very protective of their mental health. And so they want to make sure they're in a place that they feel really safe and supported. So those online communities where they're, around gaming or fandom or anything like that, feel like the right places for them. And then a lot of times that will spill out into real life, but kind of that foundational space is more in the online platforms. I think about the sense of humor. Again, obviously sense of humor is a big part of marketing. And for those of us in Gen X or millennials, where we kind of come from this dry or self-deprecating place, their absurdity can sort of seem, hard to understand. And you just have to see some Gen Z memes to be like, I don't understand what this is, but all right. So, the idea of the absurd is really important to their identity. And then self-care, as we're talking about personal care and health and beauty, this is something we need to think about too. And Gen Z is really kind of in this supportive place. Again, a lot of concern around mental health, but wanting to be supportive of each other. Even when we look back at this sense of humor, this idea that their sense of humor can be very dark, but it's never going to be unkind. So this idea of supportive self-care is really interesting and important to this generation. When we think about marketing to Gen Z, we know that they appreciate those brands that reflect their values, so that are real and authentic and are not trying too hard. Again, back to this idea of being nice and kind and inclusive, and also that kind of absurd sense of humor. What matters the most, a lot of these things are things that matter to many different generations, but again, kind of rising higher for the Gen Z market, around transparency, fairness, originality, accessibility. They're one of the generations that really values design as far as, aesthetic and making sure that attention has been paid to design, whether that's, minimalist, maximalist, whatever. But they're definitely going to notice that. Sustainability, convenience, as Colleen was saying, quality, obviously, that sense of humor and the sense of community. So how does that come across in your brand? And again, back to this idea of wanting the unexpected. They are really used to marketing, reaching them at every touch point. And so they want to have brands that are going to catch them off guard with something that's, really out of pocket, really different, something they haven't seen before. And they're much more willing to engage with something like that than something that is perfectly done and, feels, very curated. when we think about their behavior and their spending, they are very value driven and they're cautious with their spending. They have this growing power, but they're, practicing some sort of minimalism. They're definitely much more likely to buy secondhand and thrift, and they're engaging in some of those no-buy movements due to the economic concerns as they're going out on their own. However, they do love that kind of affordable affluence, those little treats. So they're, the micro luxuries like a pricey matcha or a resale sneaker drop or cosmetics that double as skincare. Those can help them feel like they're spending on themselves, that they're indulging themselves without breaking the bank. And they really do value the experiences over possessions. So they will prioritize spending on those experiences. Maybe not all the time. It's not about going to the club 2 or 3 times a week, but it's more saving up and doing those experiences that they're going to remember, that they're going to enjoy with their friends. So, when we think about it in the broader term, they're not spending less across the board necessarily, but they're reallocating. They're trading down out of those everyday expenses in order to afford those meaningful indulgences, whether they're material things or experiences. When we think about the content consumption, it's really diverse for Gen Z. They are obviously online a ton. They're still, watching filmed entertainment. Where they're watching it is, it's all over the place. But really what sets them apart is their use of some of these platforms. So, more than a quarter of Gen Z adults say that YouTube is their top used platform, but 60% of Gen Z are on TikTok and spend more time on that app than anything else. Oops, I missed one, sorry. Over half of them are using it to search for food and drink trends, as Colleen was saying. So this is really a big up and coming place. They're spending a lot of time there, more than any of the other apps. And half of them are using TikTok and Instagram instead of Google for search. And this is according to Google. So, this is, again, something that can be pretty mind-blowing for the rest of us who grew up with using search engines. That's not where all the search is being used nowadays. So we think about them being very connected and very much online. However, there is this up and coming trend with Gen Z around unplugging. 81% has said that Gen Z wish it were easier to disconnect. They're preferring in-person social interactions and physical brand experiences rather than those online ones. So some of the ways they're doing this: digital minimalism. There's kind of this growing movement to intentionally reduce their digital engagement, embracing traditional and analog activities. To that end, this return to analog tech, using flip phones. There was a whole trend around flip phone summer this past year, film cameras, and even converting to landlines in places. There's increased offline activities. There's surges in hiking, walking, board gaming, and then kind of these wellness sports spaces like running crews and supper clubs. And then, as we mentioned, this mental health awareness. So recognizing that being constantly online can lead to feelings of inadequacy. And so they're really driving for balance in their unplugging. And then lastly, these quiet trends. I mean, they are still really into trends, but they might be into some of these things that are not about posting it online. There's this kind of Martha Stewart aesthetic and farmhouse decor that has become really big with Gen Z. And it is more about doing that for yourself and your friends in your home and less about posting about it online. And the reasons why they're doing it, again, digital fatigue, their mental health concerns, and that real desire for authenticity. So looking at some broad social trends, I'm not going to go too deep into each of these ones. I think, again, Colleen's probably covered a lot of these. But as we're thinking about what's going to continue on for 2026, most of this is continue on, some of it with some slight adjustments. The dominance of short form video is going to continue for both education and for entertainment. But if we look actually right below that, this idea about social SEO, using social media for search engine is a really big part. Authenticity, that kind of raw, unfiltered, behind the scenes content and user generated content really builds trust over that polished perfection that you might be used to seeing out of marketing departments. The niche communities and private groups, as I mentioned, about kind of where the social gatherings are. Users are seeking to belong to smaller, focused spaces and prioritizing connections over the massive amounts of followers. And then kind of similar to that idea of being authentic, live streaming is continuing to be really important. Real-time interactions, it's really boosting engagement, it's driving immediate sales as well. When we think about tech, obviously AI is on everyone's minds, and generative AI is really helping creators and brands, but also AI-driven personalization can improve user experience. So think about that. The social commerce boom, again, the in-app shopping, that's so important. And the creator economy, this kind of micro or nano influencers and long-term partnerships are key for that authentic reach. Again, not about having necessarily an influencer who has the most followers, but partnering with influencers who have the right followers who are really engaged and connected. And then the last thing is around strategy. So creativity over consistency is one big thing. Again, that authentic feel is really important to Gen Z. The brand as host, so not always about putting your own stuff out there, but being the social media managers, becoming the hosts, fostering the conversation and community, and real selective engagement. Because of that social fatigue, wanting to make sure that the content that you have really fosters the meaningful connections and can be simpler and more nostalgic platforms as well. So I'm going to do a really quick case study of one project that we worked on at Trinity. And this was for Stiegl Beer, one of Austria's biggest breweries. And they came to us with the desire to attract younger millennials and LDA Gen Z, legal drinking age Gen Z in places like Brooklyn and Austin. They had really big goals in terms of growth numbers. But when they came to us, their directive was take the Austrian creative, which is very standard, old school beer advertising. And we've done tons of that and we know how it works. But it's not going to move the needle the way that Stiegl wanted to. So we really had to make them understand their audience so that we could create a campaign that would actually be effective with these consumers. So the campaign we came up with is this idea around stepping up. And you can tell from the visuals, it's very different from what you saw from the Austrian team. So with the information we knew and the insights and trends we've leaned into were around the idea of maximalism, so ensuring that we have lots for consumers to see, engage with, discover. This idea of returning to more analog, we used a real kind of collage style for our compositions, so it doesn't feel as slick. Authenticity is part of that as well. So kind of in casting and styling, we tried to veer away from the typically kind of perfect beer consumer. The idea of creativity over consistency. You'll see as I show you a few more things, like we wanted to make sure there was consistency so you can tell it's all from the same campaign, it's coming from the same place, but keeping it interesting and vibrant. Actually, I'll skip to that part now. So this is our main poster for the core lager brand. So you can see all those elements coming together. It has the stopping power through the use of these brand colors, the bold type, the compelling photography, but there's lots of elements to discover, which really keeps the viewer engaged. And then as we extend it out to, these are the Radler posters. So this is, beer and juice, which is actually a really, works well for Gen Z who's drinking less alcohol and wants more, enjoyment time with their beer, with their beverages. These, you can see, they start changing things up. We have a lot of consistency from the layout perspective, but when you see a new one, you're really interested in what's in there, what are the different elements, what are these people, what are the locations. And then when we move across the brand world, you see where we strip things down or how we redeploy elements in different media. So, the t-shirt, we want to be really big and bold, kind of plays into this nostalgia place by focusing on the can and the step up message. On digital, we can bring in some motion and, really allow different things to come to the fore. And then the coasters were a way we really wanted to engage the consumer. So on the front, we have our typical, step up message, but on the back, we have this blank where consumers can write in their names. And so they go out with their friends for drinks. Everyone writes their name on a coaster. You flip them over. When it's time to buy a round, you randomly pick one, and it's that person's turn to step up. As we've been talking about that, they're like, oh, you could totally use this in other ways where it's like, oh, your boyfriend's not stepping up. You put his name on it and give this to him. So kind of feels like there's fun ways to engage and get the Gen Z consumer really engaging with the brand itself. So the last thing we just wanted to talk about as we are moving on to our, we've been really focused on Gen Z. We do need to be aware of Gen Alpha rising. Some of these kids are kind of in the 13, 15-year-old range, so they are starting to spend. And, we were just a few things that we looked at how this is starting to form. And obviously things can change. And as they get more mature, things might bubble up to the top. But, in terms of values, they have that strong emphasis on fairness, inclusivity, and collaboration, which is very similar to Gen Z. And also something around sustainability being not such a spoken importance to them, but probably that's because they just grown up with it. It's sort of table stakes for them. With social media, again, to that idea of unplugging, they are taking a little bit of a step back, some of them as they get older, and really using social media in the kind of old school way of just connecting with their friends and less about broadcasting their lifestyle. And when we think about marketing, obviously TikTok and Instagram have been very important for Gen Z. Gen Alpha is looking for things to be more gamified. They want to have more of that interaction. And so as you're thinking about the next phase, that might be a place you're going to have to really put a lot of effort into, a lot more engagement, and a lot more interaction. And that's all. That's what I got for today.
All right. Well, thanks, Paul. And thanks, everyone. I see a bunch of questions coming in we'll address afterwards. But to round things out, Sanders from Nuex Creative is going to bring a design and packaging lens and point of view here and offering ways to think about how brands can show up visually for Gen Z. Take it away.
Great. Thank you. And thanks, Colleen and Paul. Your presentations were amazing. Love all of the information. I'm Sanders, the founder of Nuex Creative. We're an award-winning design agency. I'll just jump into it since we're short on time. So I'm going to go through this a little bit fast, but you guys can all download the deck later as well. Some of the pillars of the Gen Z packaging that we'll see across any design trends and everything else that we're looking at is first, authenticity. They want real, unfiltered, honest designs. They want honest brand experience. They want to be a little bit edgier and raw compared to some of the older generations. The next is sustainability. That's something that Colleen and Paul have highlighted that is really important for Gen Z. They're looking at the materials, they're looking at the impact of the product, and 90% are willing to actually pay more for that. The shareability screen-first approach is key. In the past, we were always selling on the shelves. Then we're selling on Amazon or online in e-commerce, and now it's TikTok forward and social media forward. And then the last is the self-expression. The packaging has a personal identity and signals an accessory. So some of the design trends that we'll cover, there's a few more than this, obviously, but these are some key ones that are really trending right now to be very aware of to make sure that you can keep your brand looking up to date and attracting Gen Z and potentially Gen Alpha afterwards. The first is dopamine design. It's actually one of my favorite trends right now. In the past, when we went minimalistic, we took a more like monochromatic approach. And right now, dopamine design is a lot about riot colors, a lot about contrast, not really having much negative space or white space, pairing unexpected color combinations that traditionally brands might have been afraid to actually implement. And it's a mood altering experience, hence the name dopamine. So it's something that is very photogenic, very Instagrammable, because again, Gen Z is looking for ways to share their product online, whether they're influencer or just a common person. When they take photos or with product, They want it to be almost Instagrammable or, TikTokable, I should say. And they want a beautiful unboxing experience, and they're looking for experiences as much as they are products, just like some of the data that Colleen and Paul had mentioned. Another one is bold minimalism. And as you can see, I did include some of the designs references in there from the previous one, specifically because you're not limited by any design tactic or trend. A lot of this overlaps. So even though dopamine design and those bright contrasting colors and lack of white space is very popular, it's overall most of Gen Z is looking for things that are a little more refined and more minimalistic, and there's an intention behind the design and how it encompasses together, even if they're using distortion or dopamine design or any of the other tactics as well. The neo-vintage aesthetic is really popular, especially like in food and beverage. It's about taking the traditional designs from the 70s and 90s and reinventing them. Everything in history kind of repeats itself. And right now, as we know, we're going through a lot of the 90s era, a lot of the grunge and retro topography and nostalgic colors. Still a lot of minimalism and modernism in there. But it's almost retro and reinventing what we've commonly seen in the stores. Distorted surrealism is also really popular, paired with kind of a dopamine color layout or even a minimalistic approach. The distorted logos is really popular for getting more attention, being a little more edgy. Right now, Gen Z is really into more cultural foods and flavors that most generations weren't really used to or excited about. For example, the Korean market is actually booming really, really largely in grocery stores. You go to Trader Joe's, you'll see a lot more Korean food. And Gen Z is willing to try different cultures, trying a different taste. And some of the distorted surrealism has been paired with those designs really well to get that attention, to give it a kind of a nod to cultural, to the edgy and spicy, but at the same time, still very modern. The indie aesthetic as well. It's playful, kind of a do-it-yourself approach. This one's definitely a lot more raw, a lot more edgy, not perfectly put together, which Gen Z actually likes. Some of them have like a sticker-like graphics, a chaotic collage, hand-drawn doodles, anti-corporate feel, right? So there's that portion of Gen Z. You see it a lot in the fashion industry, but you also see it in products as well, where you almost want to break the mold to grab their attention a lot more than traditional generations. Some case studies on some brands that did really well implementing some of the tactics to attract Gen Z. The e.l.f. Cosmetics, they generated 1.5 billion empire on TikTok, making it go viral. Very clean, minimalistic approach. They also did some neat collaborations with Liquid Death, which is another great example. 1.5 billion valuation in 5 years. Leveraging that metal aesthetic, having a lot of that raw personality that Gen Z is looking for. That you wouldn't expect in a normal drink, especially in sparkling water, right? Poppi became one of the fastest growing brands in 2024, competing with likes of Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and a market that was actually very dominated, and recently sold to Pepsi for 1.9 billion. And part of that is the clean aesthetic and the nice design, and the neo vintage, but at the same time, they did a really good job with that product experience that Gen Z is looking for, which takes us to Starface, $55 million in revenue in 2024 with over 2 million TikTok followers. They really built a unique product and kind of reinvented, the Acme stigma, but they made it in an AirPods case. And that product experience was very functional for Gen Z and became very viral really quickly. And you can see how some of the evolution of brands over time, right? Olipop was pretty much ignored until they had a facelift and that redesign, which helped them grow to 200 million. And Lay's, you can see how they've changed over time. So with any brand, it's really good to have an evergreen approach so that your brand doesn't die with the current trends for whatever generation it is. But at the same time, your product packaging should evolve to kind of meet the mediums of what that is, whether that's on shelf or e-commerce. They made theirs more social media friendly. So here's a quick packaging playbook. Obviously, social sharing first, optimizing for screens, and making it your products photogenic. Measurable impact on sustainability is key. Pack as the innovation, so the product itself has to have that innovation to attract Gen Z and the functionality, especially in the affordability range. Collectability will help increase urgency, especially if you're able to do drops, as they call it. Smartphone optimized, again, we're not optimizing for shelves as much as we are for social media nowadays. So make sure that they can read it and it's clear aesthetics. Authenticity and your brand experience is imperative. The ritualization, enabling daily rituals and self-expression through usage experience. And then your sensory elements. If you look at Liquid Death, they had a really amazing emboss texture on the can, and look at the materials as well as the product experience, not just the design of your product. So we can optimize these designs by jumping into always start with the target audience, then the market analysis, your clear messaging, and your brand experience. So one of the first mistakes people make is that you look at the Gen Z as your target audience, but you want to narrow that down. You want to have multiple target personas. You might have a Gen Z person that's a young college student buying a product at affordable range, or you might have a parent that's buying for their child and looking for health benefits, for example. So you want to make sure you always speak to the target audience. You want to also identify what the market is doing to understand how you stand out and your differentiation. And then with your clear messaging, you want to make sure that you have a 3-second read. With Gen Z, generally we used to have a 5-second rule of grabbing attention. With Gen Z, it's down to almost 3 seconds. So there's different methodologies in your target audience, but I would build those out, whether that's the wellness warrior or the ethical activist. You want to make sure that your product actually speaks specifically to that target audience or those target personas, and build those out. And then with the market analysis, you want to just identify who your direct competitors are. What information do customers expect to see? If you have big call outs on the protein aisle for protein milligram strength, then you want to make sure that you can compete with that, or that you can identify how to have differentiation from your competitors. And then understand where that white space is, what's missing, what's overdone, how is it too busy, and then how you're going to differentiate to stand out from your market. So part of it's identifying the target audience and how to speak to them, but you also want to understand how to make sure that you're keeping up with the market, as well as differentiating from the market. And you'll want to have clear messaging. As I mentioned, there used to be the 5-second rule with Gen Z's attention. It's almost a 3-second rule. You want to have clear visual hierarchy of what the product is. The big call outs in general have around 3 primary elements that grab his attention from a distance. And then you can have secondary information that can help close that sale when you're actually looking at the product up close. But from a distance, whether that's on screens or on shelves or on TikTok, you'll want to be able to grab that big call out, like how many grams of protein is it, or what other, how many grams of sugar, whatever the call out is that the target audience is looking for, or they expect to see from the market. And then the brand experience. So as we mentioned, you really want a raw, authentic brand experience. The first impressions matter. You want to have a clear understanding of what the product is, the benefit of it. You want to have an amazing unboxing experience. Try to do things that they don't expect. Gen Z likes that more than any other generation. Have hidden messages, have something built into the experience that they don't expect. And that's how you're going to build those loyal customers. And then you want to build a product that they actually enjoy. And that goes back to the unboxing experience. But then it's about when you're actually using the product, how does that make them feel? What is the repeatability of that? And then here's some of the key takeaways. Screen first, approach, radical transparency, both in sustainability and the expression of your brand. You want a clear identity extension for the product and an amazing experience. The sensory engineering, the tactile finishes on the product, soft touch, foils, whatever it is. Make sure to take that into account. It's just not the design of the packaging. It's also about what it's built from. And then that community currency, limited drops, build urgency. We live in an age where you can actually test what the next flavor is by promoting that on social media, asking customers what they're looking for next. And they like that interaction as well. Add on QR codes or something online to actually make your product come to life in more of an interactive state. And that's a good way to win over Gen Z as well. Yep. And I'm losing my voice, but that's me.
Well, thanks so much. Love that. Thanks, Sanders, and thanks to all of our speakers. Wonderful insights and beautiful presentations. Thank you for those. Sanders, I love those terms. Dopamine design and distorted surrealism. I definitely see that on the shelf more and more today. So thanks for those. All right, so we've got a little bit of time for Q&A. We had some questions come in. One of the questions, and I had this kind of myself, one of them is, does Gen Z use QR codes on labels? Any data supporting that? And I think about that and also the use of AI as far as that question goes, because I've seen some folks talking about having QR codes that lead to like conversations with founders and things like that. Anybody want to?
I think anecdotally, the two things I would say is that yes, if it takes you to some place that's going to have some meaningful interaction, I think QR codes can be used. But I do think in this whole unplugging place, I've just seen more and more. There's this trend of what's your boomer take, and Gen Z saying my boomer take is I want a real menu. I don't want a QR code. So there probably is a little bit of the QR code burnout going on, but if you can have it lead to something meaningful, they're probably more likely to engage with it.
Okay. How does Gen Z feel about influencers? Anybody? I sure see it in my home, being a big influence, but you guys have any feel on that?
Just anecdotally, I think, they're already being influencers themselves. Like they care about what their friends are saying. So whether it's not through an official influencer, they are embodying this influencer culture themselves.
Yeah, and again, I think as long as it feels like a more authentic person that they're connecting with, and it's not about a Kardashian necessarily, or someone who has like millions and millions of followers, but it's like, oh, this person's a cool musician or cook or whatever it is that's important to them, they'll be more likely to listen to them.
Yeah, it seems like they're growing more in like the micro influencers for that authenticity that they actually trust. And this is anecdotal, but I did read a report that in schools, some of the students were actually listing that some of the jobs they wanted was influencers. So that's grown a lot from what it was before. But I think you see a lot more Yelp reviews and anything else, and almost that micro influence where they want to take photos of everything and share it to some extent.
Okay. There's a question on, right, we had millennials versus prior generations with this delayed adulthood, right? Late to marry, late to have kids, late to own a home. Are we seeing any early trends on that? I know top of Gen Z is only 28, but are we seeing that as well?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing some of that. And you can see their purchase data then come in through their parents in the Gen X, and how that bubble chart that I had showed might have skewed some of the Gen X, insights in the categories that they're purchasing, because there's Gen Z still in the household. They're delaying their own home ownership, those big other milestones. So it is coming out in the data when we compare and look at some of those other future generations that would have Gen Z in the household.
Yeah, true. A question about packaging is, have you seen any, doing variable printed designs, like the share a Coke thing with different names. I've seen that run on press kind of approach. You guys implemented any of those recently, and does that resonate with Gen Z?
You said the shared cook approach. Sorry.
Yeah, like, just variable printed packaging, right? So like different different messages, you know, maybe five or six different ones by flavor, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, where it's independent per flavor. Yeah, it depends. I think bigger brands are a little more consistent or they build out to separate brands. But in general, yeah, you can use that to kind of create unique experiences per flavor. So, for example, craft beer, for example, is a really good, big example of that, where they're actually looking for illustrations and styles for each flavor. So you build out that unique experience. The only caveat to that is that you need to have consistent branding. Otherwise, you're going to lose that, especially on the shelf, for example, because then you're not going to recognize it's the same brand. So that's the only caveat is that you do want to have some brand consistency. But markets like craft beer and other places with unique flavors, it's a really good tactic.
I also think, like Sanders said about collectability being important. I know that, like the Gen Z poster child, Liquid Death, they did on their 12 packs, they did a bunch of artist packs where it was just the very bottom
Mhm.
of it had
Yeah,
different
I
artwork
saw
from
that.
different artists. And, you would go to, actually, I saw it in Brooklyn. And it was a liquor store and they just had all of them facing out. And so people know that you can go in there and find the ones that you want or the ones that speak to you. And it's not about those aren't variable printing like the Coke name thing, but I think that idea of collectability is certainly important.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I mean the Coke one's one of the pinnacles of that example, right? You can get your name on there. It's really hard to implement that from an economic stance, though, because it's very expensive. So that's why you don't see it as much.
Hmm. Is there anything brands are overlooking when they try to reach Gen Z? And I guess that opened up for everyone. Is there something, there's must-dos and others that they're overlooking and not doing?
I mean, the top of mind is the authenticity, right? I think a lot of brands are just trying to target Gen Z, but they're not actually starting with what is the authentic brand experience. And so Gen Z can really see through that. One of the common terms right now is greenwashing, where brands will put a very vague term of sustainability, and they see through that because they know that if it's a vague term of sustainability, it's probably not a sustainable product. But a lot of times you're designing just trying to target them versus build a brand from that authentic state where it will naturally attract them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also that idea um, that they can spot marketing a mile away. So in some ways you can't follow any of the rules that we've just laid out because once everyone's following those rules, then Gen Z is like, yeah, this is just a Gen Z product. I'm not buying into that. So you sort of have to zag, each time and try to do something completely different.
Huh. And I think we have time for one more a question about, and I've seen this happen with a client going one direction versus the other, but are there ways you recommend approaching package design for brands that are going from primarily D2C versus other brands that are sold, omni-channel and more traditional? I've seen some that only were D2C and needed to update because now they're going to be on shelf. Um, any thoughts there?
I mean, anytime you're changing the medium, especially like, D2C or on shelves or Amazon, for example, the first thing to really look at is like the visual hierarchy. How are you grabbing attention? How is it viewable, right? If you don't tackle that right away, then even if they see it on TikTok, for example, they might not see the certain selling points, what the product is. They might not understand it. They're going to have the same issues that you currently have with Amazon, of not identify it, and then that can really hurt your sales.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll leave everyone with a few minutes to get to your next meetings. Wonderful job, Colleen, Paul, Sanders, and Monique. Thank you for setting this all up. That's a good way to, I think, close out the year. It's an important consumer group that's coming of age, and certainly our ways to address them as marketers, as brand people, as business owners, definitely shifting over time. So thank you so much. And as Monique mentioned, you guys will get links to all the presenters and get their presentations as a follow-up. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
All
thank
right,
you.
take care.